Ladies and gentlemen, you are tuned into Fatherhood is Dope, the podcast with your guy, Aaron McGee. Per usual, I'm so grateful that you decided to tap back into the podcast and to join us on this episode. I have a special guest with me today who is a pastor, an executive pastor, and an author, an award-winning author of 7 books. He has the honor of being a husband and the grace to be a father. I think I got those adjectives right. You know, a father of 3 sons and married to his amazing bride, Corey. I'm honored to have you with me today. Will you all help me in your virtual clap somewhere, wherever and whenever you're listening to this podcast? Help me welcome Bryan Loritts to the episode. How you doing, sir?
Well, I'm honored to be on here with you. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been reading about you and seeing everything you have going on online, and I know, you and I were just going back and forth about traveling. Here's the thing. So I do the podcast, but another one of my gigs, my jobs deals with consulting, church consulting. And, I come from that culture where I'm used to being on a plane like every other week or so. And in March, it literally came to a complete end. And at the onset, I was like, yeah, I get to be home a little more. Yeah, all those parking fees I have to pay at the airport and the way I abuse Chick-fil-A at Hartsfield, Atlanta airport. I mean, they know, they see me coming, so I'm thinking, yeah, my body's going to get a little break and everything. And now I'm like, Lord, I'm so ready to schedule a trip just anywhere, just a day trip and back. So before we really get into it, how's your travel schedule? How is the pandemic impacting you?
Yeah, that's one of the blessings, to be honest. So last year, I think I did 140,000 miles of air travel last year.
Oh, yeah.
And then like you, man, January, February was kind of the same travel wise. In March, everything got shut down. I mean, everything. Yeah. So now I'm going into studios, recording messages and sending them places that request me. But it's been a real gift for me, to have this extra time in the house with my wife and kids. And, I've been saying all along, this whole idea of can't wait to get back to normal, the old way of life.
Talk to me.
I think if you go back to the way things were, I think you missed out on maybe what God was wanting to do in your life in this season. So, it's caused me to just kind of do a personal audit of everything, even how I traveled and the amount of time that I traveled.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go back, when we come out of this, I'm not going back to 125, 130,000 miles a year.
Okay.
I praise God for the slowdown. But that said, I think my wife and I may need to go to therapy when all this is done, because we ain't used to being around each other this much, so.
Yeah. Everybody is rediscovering their spouses right now.
Yes.
I don't care how long you've been together or even the kids, you're kind of rediscovering the kids, especially if they're still in the house.
Right.
And some kids, what's the age range of your sons?
19, 17, 15.
Okay. So to a large degree, they're all in the house. Maybe is your 19-year-old, is he in college or is he in school?
He's in college, but I mean, just like most college students, we had to come get him in March.
Right. Yeah. So with that being said, well, at least he's 19 because, you got folks in that 33 and under range that also went back home in March. And they're not in school, but that's my generation. And honestly, my brother is works in production in New York. And when we found out what was going on, I'm located here in Nashville. My parents are here in Nashville. And we kind of demanded that he came home. And he spent the first, came home mid-March. and went back to New York around May 20th. So,
Okay.
you know, everybody's coming back home in some form, and folks are just rediscovering one another. But yeah, I just did a panel last night about Black men and mental health. And so when you say that you may need to go to therapy, I think therapists should be in high demand, whether you're a Black male, uh, a white male, like just all across the spectrum. Like everyone has, between the pandemic and some of the other things that are happening across our country, I think we all need a special mental health checkup, you know, in addition to support us in our faith.
Absolutely. And I would say that that transcends crisis, pandemics. You know, to your point, you know, Black men and mental health. I know me personally, I didn't come up in an environment where that phrase was even mentioned, or words like depression, anxiety, whatever.
Yeah.
My dad's a pastor, and his approach on it was just read your Bible more, or pray more, or it wasn't until my late 30s, man, when I stumbled on this thing of emotional health, mental health, therapists, and it's been a blessing in my life.
Yeah, that's good. You know, ironic enough, so I'm sitting here kind of in my kitchen living space, and I was trying to figure out what shirt to toss on real quick, and I would literally, I walked in my closet, and the sweatshirt that stood out to me, it says Jesus in therapy on it. And I said, you know something, it's the summer. Let me not throw on a sweatshirt, but it's appropriate. Well, I have you on the podcast because we wanted to explore this book that you authored. This is the 7th installment as an author?
It is. That's my 7th book. That's right.
Okay. Your book is called The Dad Difference, the 4 most important gifts you can give your kids. I do want to say before we get into it, so I just want to let everyone see the book. Yo, if you are watching the podcast on YouTube, then make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and make sure that you download and share. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, then thank you. Check the description. All of the links to Bryan's book and other resources will be available in the description. But Bryan, as before we get into the book, or just starting with the foreword, man, I will say that man, the foreword was written by your father. Is that correct?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, man. It was heartfelt. I highlighted. You know, stuff is good when you don't want to abuse the page, so you just make that little mark to highlight the entire page.
Right.
Like, I said, oh man. Honestly, after reading the foreword for him, I kind of felt bad for you. I said, I don't know what you have to offer. I said, I don't know what you have to offer at this point, but the foreword was excellent. I'm not sure if I'm gonna. Let me take a quick look. I highlighted something. Yeah, I do want to read this last part because it resonates with me, and then I'll get into you. But since your dad's not here, let me honor him in reading this. It's one of in the second to the last paragraph in his foreword. He says, I am praying that you will embrace your privileged calling to be a dad, and that you will take those inevitable setbacks, hit the reset button, and go after it again. That just resonated with me, particularly based on the language he used, when particularly him using the word calling. And it's literally the reason why I started this platform, because there was this idea that I heard from a mother in a program that I used to work with in youth development. And long story short, she was walking out of my office one day, and I said, hey, we're going to get through this. You know, Aaron is here. I'm a part of the village. And she said, I know we're going to get through it because God called me to raise these kids. And this was back in 2013. And prior to that, I had never heard this term or this phrasing of being called to raise children. I understand callings and spiritual giftings, but she said she was called to raise these kids. And so when I became a father, I didn't wait for anyone to tell me I was called. I just decided that I'm called to be a father and to raise my daughter. And so Can you speak to that a little bit on how you saw your dad answering the call to fatherhood and how that translates in your ability or your position as a father?
Yeah, I think the point he's making there is that fatherhood is not something that you just kind of haphazardly stumble into biologically. It's not just a biological process. The world is filled with, across all ethnicities, of individuals who laid down with a woman and engaged in a biological process, but did not embrace the calling, right?
Yeah.
So it's that age old kind of adage, you can be a dad, but not a father.
Mm-hmm.
And to be a father means I'm stepping up to the plate, and I'm going to leverage everything that I have to set this child on a trajectory of success in life. And that's what dads do. And because of that, it colors every aspect of my life. It informs how I do time. I got a buddy of mine, he's the oldest of 6 kids. And he said his dad worked in a factory and had to get up every morning at like 4:30 in the morning, but his dad didn't have an alarm clock.
Wow.
And later on in life, he said, Dad, I just noticed you didn't have an alarm clock, but you got up every day at 4:30. How'd you get up? He said, responsibility woke me up. And that's what we're getting to, right? I got people counting on me, and that colors how I work, how I steward money. My kids get on me from time to time. Dad, you don't wear the latest gear and the latest fashion, and your shoe game ain't what it should be. I said, okay, I could be up on the latest. You may not be able to have a college fund, but I can have the Jordans. And at that moment, I just helped them to see I'm making different choices, driving older cars, whatever, because I want to set them up for success. And that's what a father does. You're embracing that calling.
Yeah. I have to let you know, I already predetermined that for this conversation that I'm probably going to be taking notes. So because far too often, I mean, so many people drop nuggets, and I listen to these interviews over and over, but I want to be present in this moment, and so you talking about the offerings of what a father can offer his children, and so I mean the title of the book are the 4 most important gifts you can give your kids, and so let's go ahead and crack that open, and let's share with dads on what you believe that those 4 most important gifts are, and how are they helpful, how are they beneficial.
That's good. So let me caveat what I'm about to say. I just shared with you, I got a 19-year-old, 17-year-old, 15-year-old.
Yep.
So this book is not about look at me and what an awesome dad I am. The jury's still out. The concrete's still wet. This is me really as a son reflecting on my father and just feeling like he did a great job. And here are 4 gifts that he gave me. And so it's relationships, it's integrity, it's teaching, and it's experiences. So it's an acronym. We call it Fathering Right, RITE.
Yep.
And honestly, the glue that holds all these 4 gifts together is intentionality.
Yep.
So if you were to ask me, what's the difference between a great dad and a bad dad? I would say it's one word, it's intentional. Yeah. And, I look at things through a biblical worldview, and I understand not everybody tuning in does, but I will say this: in Genesis chapter 3, that story of kind of Eve eating the forbidden fruit, I used to think Adam was way on the other side of the garden when this happened. But the Bible actually says that when she ate, she turned to her husband who was with her, which means her husband was watching his wife get manipulated by a snake. And I think the subtle teaching of all that is that one of the gifts that Adam has given us, unfortunately, is the gift of passivity. Men, the natural gravitational force of men is away from intentionality and downward into passivity. I'm tired. I just want to come home. I want to sit in front of the TV. I want to watch TV all the time. I just want to kick it. And that's not the stuff of fatherhood. Now, are there moments when I take care of myself? Absolutely. I go play golf and I'll watch a sports game, whatever. But if I'm going to really deposit and invest in my kids, it's going to take a constant war with passivity and being intentional. It's getting off the sofa when I'm tired and playing catch with my son. It's showing up at their events. It's having vision for their life and proactively speaking into it. And so when I talk about these 4 gifts, none of them are going to work if I'm not intentional.
Yeah.
So number 1 is relationship. And I think intentionally, that's first and foremost, not only because it makes the acronym work, but I cannot lead anything effectively that I'm not intimately connected to. And so when I look back on my childhood, what stands out are the hundreds of hours Dad and I spent fishing together. And a lot of those hours, he's untangling my line because I done got it tangled up again. Yeah. It's sitting in Atlanta, Fulton County Stadium, watching the Braves play. In fact, if you critique apart from relationship, that child is going to take that as condemnation. So if I'm going to
hold on. So this is a moment where I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have to revisit that because from my experience alone, that's where most dads miss the mark. And you literally have just hit a nerve in me that I was not expecting to be exposed. So you said if we critique past relationship, I wanted the listeners to really hold on to this point really quickly, because that is an essential nugget. I'm sorry, you can pick back up, but I had to put a pin in it right there, Bryan. I'm sorry.
No, it's important because look, I've missed it on here, and I think every dad knows what it's like to just go through seasons where you just like, man, I feel bad because it feels like I'm always correcting my child. And sometimes that happens, right?
Yeah.
But what's going to make that correction be received or be heard is when it's done in an environment, in a greenhouse of relationship. So when my child feels loved and connected to me, when I give the critique, they're better postured to receive and hear it. But if I'm critiquing without relationship, that's condemnation. And it's going to exasperate them. It's going to devastate them. It's and I see this all the time. I mean, we can spend a whole podcast just talking about that. But that's an essential. Yeah. And so what are we getting to? Relationship.
Good.
And just walking in that with your kids.
That's good. You got 3 other letters.
Yeah.
But I know you letting me slide in, so I have to say this. So in the context of how I grew up, my mom and my dad were in my household. I've always known my parents, but my friends would always be surprised to find out you live with your dad, or your dad lives with you, and that's because they saw the presence of my mom, right? And so I'll say this without condemning my dad, because that's not where I am. Things are reconciled. However, I contextualize my dad as having a dad who was physically present but emotionally absent. And when I somehow I've been given the language to describe the 2 of them, and I said what made my mom different from my dad is that both of them were disciplinary parents. We got the same amount of punishments and whoopings and everything from dad as we did from mom, but we only knew our dad in that critique stance. And what separated him from my mom is that she had camaraderie with us. But now I have even more language to just summarize camaraderie as relationship. So right. we knew backdrop. So after the punishment, the whooping or the chastisement, he was like, well, we get it because we know her. And we didn't know that voice of my father because a great part of our existence together, relationship was absent.
Right. No, that's what you're saying is is spot on, and it's something that I, along with just about every dad, needs to continually be reminded of,
Yeah.
and to constantly grow in. The next gift is integrity, and I define integrity as kind of the alignment of words with deeds. Now, unfortunately, when people think integrity, they think moral perfection. That's not integrity. In fact, one of the things I point out in the book is my dad is the most integrous person I know, and he was full of integrity even in his mistakes. And what I mean by that, I've got a whole chapter dedicated. It's called Apologies.
Yeah.
When my dad would mess up and miss it, one of the things he was always quick to do is he would stop and would apologize. There were times he would actually come up to our schools, grab us out of class, and would apologize for accusing us of something we didn't do, or yelling at us, or the way that he talked to us. And what in his apologies, again, I understand not everybody listening in is coming from this worldview, but he came from a worldview that was rooted in the Bible. And what he understood the standard of the Bible to be teaching was that when he blew it, he had to make an apology. And
Yeah.
let me just say this to dads. And in fact, I say it to every listener. A genuine apology is not, I'm sorry you took it that way. That's not an apology. Or I'm sorry you heard it that way. A genuine apology takes ownership. I'm sorry and it's specific. I yelled at you. I lied. And then it makes the big ask, will you forgive me?
Yeah.
And I remember Dad's apologies more than his mistakes.
Yeah.
And his apologies actually served to endear me to him even more so. I was drawn to him because I saw his humanity and his humility.
Yes.
And that was absolutely key. So that's integrity. Third is teaching. One of the things I say in the book is, dads, we are the tenured professors in our homes. And when you think of teaching, it's not just what comes out of your mouth, but it's also how you live. It's being on that road trip, and how do you handle when we're at a restaurant on the road trip and they mess up your order? How do you treat them? It's watching the way you treat mom. It's watching the way you relate to women. You are constantly teaching. So my dad traveled a lot, and sometimes he would take us on trips with him. And I remember as a little boy, one time we get into a hotel room, and he did this every single time. Now, this is in a pre-smartphone era.
Yeah.
He would take out a 5x7 photo of the family and would put it in a prominent place in the hotel room. And for years, I'd watch him do that. I never understood why. And I remember one time hearing my mom talk about that. And she was like, oh, yeah. Your dad would do that because he needed to be visually reminded while he was thousands of miles away from home that he's got a lot of people counting on him and don't do anything stupid. Well, that's teaching me. He's teaching me these things, and I'm watching it. And that's why the old adage is so clear. Most lessons in life are caught and not so much taught. But even in the catching, that's because we're watching your example. And then finally is experiences. And as it relates to experiences, it's, one of the things my wife and I, we're not wealthy, we're not rich, but we're typical middle class, we're a typical middle class family. And one of the things we've realized is somebody described entitlement as consumption without contribution. So whenever you have people who consume, but they're not really contributing, that's entitlement. And man, that's our kids. And so what we saw early on was, if we weren't, here's that word again, if we weren't intentional in giving our kids experiences, we were going to release from our home narcissistic, prideful individuals who think the world's only about them.
Yeah.
And so when they're 10, we take them on missions trips. We go to Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and they serve. We would every single week, we would go to the homeless mission where we lived. And our kids, from the time they were little guys, they would stand in line and put food on homeless people's plates. Because I wanted them to see the cul-de-sac you live on is not normal.
Yeah.
And I need to give you experiences. They know the deal is, look, when you're 16, I'll buy you a car. But in order for that to happen, you have to have a job and you have to have $1,000 in the bank. Because if something goes wrong, you're paying for it. So these are the kinds of experiences that we're giving to our kids, trying to set them up. And I think we give our kids these 4 gifts, we'll set them on a trajectory for success.
Yeah, I think you're doing an amazing job of explaining why fatherhood is so important. But just to make the distinction, and I try to do this whenever whenever we're doing an episode here, when we talk about, because I noticed you use the term we, and that we is clearly referring to you and your wife, and you guys are partners in raising your children. But what would you say the distinguish is of the significance of the father in that relationship, in the marriage, and as it directly relates to your children?
Well, in my situation, an easy answer is I got boys.
Yeah.
And shout out to all the single moms out there. And I got a sister who's a single mom. And I want to encourage you, especially if you have sons, prayerfully seek out mentors who can invest in your kids. Because here's the deal. Manhood is imprinted. It is not inherited. Manhood is imprinted. It is not inherited. And again, I'm moving beyond biology. Just because you have certain physical parts does not make you a man. It may make you a man biologically, but when we're talking about an individual who just steps up and takes on the posture of a servant leader for the initiative of others, who embraces responsibility, that thing is imprinted. And so one of the differences in our household is, yes, my wife plays a key foundational role. She nurtures. It's how she's designed. She provides that sense of nurturing security to our kids. But I'm actually giving my kids, right, wrong, or indifferent, a visual blueprint for what manhood looks like. And they're either going to say, I like that, I want to cut and paste it, or I know some men, some of the best fathers I know came up in situations where their dads weren't good examples. Yeah. And they know the pain of that. And they actually said, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Yeah. And they turned out to be incredible fathers. And so my role, and listen, I know in today's age, people don't like this term. And my wife and I, we mutually submit. It's a partnership. And I serve my wife as best as I can. But I actually believe that I'm the leader of the home. Now, when I say leader, I don't mean dictator. Yeah. This ain't a pound my chest, you do what I say. I think effective leadership makes those behind you flourish. And so I'd like to believe my wife would say, I'm a better woman because I'm following your leadership. But I believe God's called me to be responsible for my home and to call those who are under my leadership to flourish and thrive. So that's a difference, to answer your question.
Yeah, that's good. Well, in the book, you talk about 2 types of dads: those who act as tailwinds and those who act as a headwind. And I'm curious to know, or for you to give us a description of those 2 and explain the difference.
Yeah, right off the bat, I use this analogy, man. I've flown a lot, and it seems like you have as well. And one of the things I've noticed when you fly from coast to coast, when you go from the West Coast to the East Coast, you typically get to your destination faster because you've got a tailwind. Yeah. When you go from the East Coast to the West Coast, it takes you a little bit longer because you're battling a headwind. In either direction, you'll probably hit pockets of turbulence. And I use that as an analogy for fathering. And, there's some dads out there. I was just talking about this. and you're listening in, and maybe you had a dad who wasn't around. He was physically absent. Or maybe you had a dad, he was around, but he was emotionally absent, or maybe he was abusive. These are headwind dads. And I want to encourage you by saying you can still get to your destination. You can still get to where God wants you to get in life, but it may take you a little longer because unfortunately, dad wasn't around, intentional, available to really step up and do his job. On the flip side are tailwind dads. These are dads who are intentional, they're loving, they're stepping up, they're leading the way that they should. And what's the result? They're inspiring and encouraging their kids who will arrive at their God-ordained destinies a lot quicker because of the fruits of fathering in their lives. And so I want to encourage us to be tailwind dads.
Yeah. So wherever you fall in whether you're a headwind or a tailwind dad, do you believe that the mistakes that they make are still similar mistakes? Are they common mistakes?
Listen, I would replace the word they with we, because
touche, because I am included in that number.
Right. Because look, there are days, there are weeks, there are seasons in every father's life where you feel more like a headwind than a tailwind.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and there's days, weeks, seasons where you feel more like a tailwind. So we all go through that. And, there are times in which, man, I just got a lot of regret. Like I was traveling too much. I was gone too much, or I was too heavy-handed here, or I was too passive there. We've all dropped the ball, right? But if you're living and you're listening to this, it's God's grace to say, look, you're not done. Your assignment as a dad is not over. Step up, wipe the dirt off your shoulders and keep it moving. You can resolve today to change the trajectory of your life and therefore your children's lives.
Okay. Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more, and I'm glad that you reminded me in this moment that I'm in the number. I really try to never exclude myself, especially when it's something where you're falling short, because I want to be the first person to say, yeah, because sometimes I can be a headwind dad and maybe husband too, but that's another podcast. And so I think we all have some work to do. You know what's interesting? So I hear you talk about how your dad modeled a behavior for you, whether it's seeing the picture in the hotel room and traveling with him and fishing and things of that nature. So I'm curious to know that my listeners are primarily already fathers, and then we have moms and wives that listen to the podcast as well. But I have a 3-year-old daughter who is very in tune that, when dad is recording the podcast and she listens to episodes, and of course she's not able to contextualize everything, but I'm curious to know, as a dad, what are some of the things that I can do now to teach my daughter how to be a better mother, or if you have a son, that is teaching them how to become a father before they actually get into those roles.
Yeah, so I would say, listen, are there things specifically you can do, moments you could specifically capture? Absolutely. And I'll share some of those with you in just a few moments. But at the end of the day, what's really going to stick with that child is you hanging around for the long haul and them being able to watch you. Because the way you treat your daughter's mother is going to really set the stage for what she's going to look for in a man, right? And so that's just huge. You are establishing your daughter's normal. You are calibrating her expectations. And just by you showing up, contributing to the well-being of the household, her safety, her security. I remember, man, the first night my wife and I came back from the honeymoon, we're laying in bed and she says to me, sweetheart, you going to lock the door? And I'm thinking to myself, you can lock the door. And that led into a conversation of, why do you expect me to lock the door? And she's like, that's just what my dad did every night. He just locked the door. Now we can talk about whether or not he should have done that, but what's happening in that moment? She was raised used to seeing things from her dad that now she projects that expectation on her husband. What did her dad do? By his actions, he calibrated her expectations. So I would say the biggest thing you can do is to show up, be consistent, and to just model integrity and what it looks like to just be the steward in your home. That's huge. Then there's other things that you can do. I'm a big believer in the rites of passage ceremony. There's a great book out there. Let me give you a couple of resources. Robert Lewis did a great book years ago called Raising a Modern Day Knight. Family Life does a resource. Gosh, what is the name of it? It'll come to me. It's around the issue of sexual purity, and it's a weekend that you can just spend away with your child. But when our kids turn 13, we do a rites of passage weekend. And my dad, the patriarch of the family, comes out and we fly somewhere, we go somewhere fun. And we have the big sex talk with them, and we pronounce manhood on them. And my dad hands them a Bible he's been working on with that kid in mind, with prayers in it. But we want to mark that moment in their journey. And we want to say, this is a significant moment, and we're calling you up to manhood. We're calling you up to womanhood, whatever that looks like. I want to encourage you all to be intentional. Again, that's the word we keep coming back to. In your journey in setting expectations for the trajectory of where that child is headed.
There's when you talk about these expectations, you talk about your daughter seeing how you treat your wife, and it goes for your son too, but especially for her, you're calibrating her expectations. So I want to get into this idea of how intertwined are the idea of being a husband, a faithful husband, and a faithful father.
Yeah, look, if statistics are right, over half the men listening to this have spent significant stretches away from their biological children. And let me just encourage you that no matter what went down with your kid's mom, whether or not that was your wife who's now your ex-wife or a girlfriend or whatever it may be, you have an obligation to that child. And I would highly encourage you to try to foster some kind of an amicable relationship with the mother of that child. Doesn't mean y'all have to be best friends. I think that's ideal if you are friends, but you do need to be able to present a unified front for the sake of being actively committed to the well-being of that child. Yeah. And so it's what we would simply call grace. You know what I'm saying? We've all messed up. We've all blown it, but you don't have to compound the mistakes, right? And don't take out resentment you may have on that child's mother on that child. And you need to be able to invest significantly. You know, all the sociological data says, as goes the home, so goes society. And then you can just continue to whittle that down and say, as goes the dad, so goes the child, so goes the home, so goes society. So this is what we talked about in the beginning, as far as embracing fatherhood. I'm going to make the decision to play an active role in this child's life, irregardless of what the status of that relationship is with their mother. But give yourself grace. Allow yourself to experience some forgiveness. And then let me just say this, pay your child support. You know, if you got to take an extra job, that's what this manhood, fatherhood thing is about. But you don't want to sit down with your child when they're 30 years old and you're at the Waffle House or something, and that child say, Dad, where were you? And we didn't get what we needed financially. And no, step up. And it's never too late to do that.
Yeah, that's good. So let's stay in this vein of single fatherhood. You know, I like to talk to men that represent fatherhood across the entire spectrum. But we know not every dad is parenting in the home with their partner, their spouse. So outside of paying their child support, what are there any other common traps that you see single fathers falling in, or any other piece of encouragement that you can say to them? A lot of them, I have several friends personally who are single fathers that, excuse me, I do want to say that I have in some way modeled an example of fatherhood from them. One friend comes to mind. I've had him on the episode before, who he became a father within his marriage, and since that time, he and his wife have separated. It's been over a decade, and I've seen him in so many ways master is relative, but master fatherhood, and I've honored and admired that. And so I think that there's a stigma on single dads, and so I just want to kind of speak to it from both sides, whether it's the affirmations and then the hey, God, let's get it together in this area, which we already know you need to pay your child support.
Absolutely. So I would, another encouragement I would offer is keep your word. If there's a joint custody situation and it's your day, it's your weekend, I understand extenuating circumstances happen, but keep your word. Don't make that child feel like they're an inconvenience or they're an addendum or a footnote. Show up and really go all out. But I would just also encourage just highly, speak your child's love language. I think a great resource to listen to or to read is The Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. We're all wired with a specific love language. That's how we like to receive love, whether or not it's words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, gifts, physical touch. Study your child, learn your child, and speak their love language often and well. Later on this evening, me and my oldest, we're just going to go out. It's been a minute. Parenting young adults is a whole nother thing, man. But I told him the other day, I need to get into your world. And I just want to hear what's going on with you and how could I encourage you? And I want you to pick out the restaurant. We're going to go out and we're going to just spend some time doing that. I once heard a guy give a meaningful piece of advice. He's a prominent pastor in the Northeast, and he says, you know what? When I was little, my kids were kind of always used to being under my shadow, and the worst thing I could do was to show up at their games and try to come across as if I was the expert. If you would have only done it that way or that way. He said, so I proactively looked for ways to have my kids coach me. And I think that's just good advice for any dad. Instead of always showing up as the expert, pointing out things they can do better, just listen. And I would just, whether or not you're with their mom or not, I just think listening, asking good questions, and hearing their hearts is huge.
Yeah. Man, I hate to keep pulling my friends into this conversation, but I'm thinking about so many of my friends, my father friends who I'm really believing is going to benefit from this conversation. When we started talking, I told myself, something, because I understand the wealth of knowledge that you have, even your role as an executive pastor, as an author, as a father. My daughter's 3, your oldest is 19, so you got 16 years on me in fatherhood, and that's not even counting the other experiences that you had. Because I do believe that fatherhood starts even before you have your biological kids, whether that's in a mentor role, a big brother role. That's the heart of the father. I think God places that on so many of us if we embrace it. And so I know you have experience, so I'm enjoying this conversation with you thoroughly, Bryan. There's this idea that we all talk about, and it's kind of cliche, that it takes a village to raise a child. And so I'm curious to know who's a part of your village, and what's a healthy way to engage or to establish a village around the rearing of your children.
Yeah, that sentiment is really spot on, and you'll feel it the older your kids get. It's sort of like you and your spouse sitting down with a therapist.
Yeah.
and you pay that therapist $150 an hour, and after an hour you get in the car and your wife is like, oh, that was amazing, and you're sitting there going, that person told you the same thing I've been telling you.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's where I think the village comes in, is you can have like-minded people that you trust investing in your kids who can pretty much say the same thing you've been saying it, but because you're daddy, they're less apt to really listen to it. And so
reinforcement.
Yep, absolutely. And again, my faith tradition, I believe some of the best parenting happens on your knees when you're praying for your kids. And one of the things I've prayed for my kids is that God would release into their lives good, positive voices that they would listen to. And so, you know, it's relatives. It's some relatives that I trust. It's camp counselors. You know, our kids go to camp every summer to a great camp that we love. That's in line with our values. That's a part of their village. They've got godparents. These are friends that aren't related to us biologically, but people that we say we want to entrust our kids to you. In fact, our youngest right now is in Memphis with his godparents, where he's been the last couple of weeks. And they get up every day at 4:30 in the morning, him and his godfather. They do like a men's meeting, Bible study together. Wow. And he's on cloud 9, but that's that village thing where they can reinforce the very values you've been trying to instill in your kids.
That's beautiful. You know, I'll be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my work in the youth development space. For over a decade now, I was the program director for an Achievers program with the YMCA. And I've been that camp counselor and doing some led mission trips to the DR and a couple other places. And I've always appreciated and understood the relationship. This is before I became a parent. I hadn't done much since I've been a dad in that space. But prior to, I've always appreciated the partnership of being a part of a family's village where parents have entrusted me, whether it's a weekend, a day, or just the ability to speak into the lives of their children. And I use that word partnership too. It's a part of the village, but one of the caveats I want to say to that is being in the village takes agreement with the parents. I don't want to say the chiefs or the heads, but you know, if you have the privilege to speak into someone else's a child's life and you're a part of that village, I do want to acknowledge that it takes you to be in complete agreement with the parent, and for you all to reinforce those same ideals and values. Although Mr. Aaron may say it a different way than, you know, Daddy Bryan, you know, and so I don't know. I just think that that's a unique factor, and hopefully one day I'll be able to send my daughter away for a weekend or 3 weeks or however long your son is away down there.
It's important. It really is.
Bryan, what's been the most challenging parts around fatherhood for you? And you can counter that by sharing what's been some of the easiest things that you may not have thought were going to come so easily to you.
Look, you know, this is something I probably should have said earlier in our conversation. You know, I don't want people to read my book, The Dad Difference, and leave thinking this is a surefire recipe to manufacture great kids.
Yeah.
It is not. You can't manufacture great kids. All that is, it's sort of like, you know, you can exercise and work out every day. You can have a great nutrition plan, and you can still die at 27 years of age.
Yeah.
Right. But what working out and eating healthy does is it sets the trajectory, the possibilities for long life. It's the same thing with the principles in this book. You can do these things, and look, our kids, they've got their own free will. They make their own choices. And you can have kids who, you know, just don't turn out the way you envisioned. It doesn't make you a bad parent. One of the things my dad always said was, we parents tend to take too much credit when our kids turn out right and too much blame when they don't.
Yeah.
And so all you can do is just do your absolute best and set the trajectory. And so having said that is, and it's one of the chapters in this book, it was important for me to put it in there. And I got my kids' permission. Look, man, I've got kids who've gotten suspended from school, who've had alcohol before the legal limit. We've watched them make unfortunate choices that we didn't agree with, and it's hard. So I think every parent who has kids, especially who've gone through those teenage years, we know that pain of, man, this kid is making choices that is out of alignment with what they've been taught. But guess what? So does God, right? Like, you and I make choices that are different from how we were taught, right? And so that's the frustrating part of parenting is I'm doing everything I can. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm making sacrifices for this kid to fly. And man, they are just making bad choices. It doesn't get any more frustrating than that.
Yeah. You talk about our relationship with God. So can you draw the correlation of how even our relationship with our earthly father impact the relationship with our heavenly father?
Absolutely. One of the first lines in the book is, I say dad is the most powerful 3-letter word in the English language.
You did. Yep.
And then I say, some of y'all have a problem with that because you can think of another powerful 3-letter word called God. And I counter by saying, oftentimes how we see God was predicated on how we saw dad, right? Dad is the lens through which we see God. And so what that means is, some of you all had dads where nothing you did was ever good enough.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do? Now you're going to take that same perspective and attach it to God, where you just think, man, God is just, I can never please him. It's never good enough. It's whatever. Or maybe you had Disneyland dad, right? Who just was almost like a Santa Claus, just kind of spoiled you, blah, blah. Well, then maybe you'll attach that to God. So, man, this is daunting, but we dads are giving our kids, we're forming their perspective on who God is. And that's an impossible standard to live up to. But there's a weightiness in there that I should feel. Like, I'm giving them a huge perspective on who God is.
Yeah. This is so good. Just as I think about the relationship I had with my father and how I described it earlier, it had a direct impact on how I would receive God in my life, and how I would interact with other men as well. And I think it's important that we note that you are saying that you're not saying how men in your life treat you will impact how you interact with their heavenly father. You're specifically talking about the role of a father, your father in your life, how his impact directly has a direct correlation with how you will receive or interact or your heavenly father. So, man, I think that is so important to figure out, and I appreciate.
But that's why, not to cut you off, that's why hypocrisy is so devastating to a child's faith, right? So when you have a dad who will go to church, who will give lip service, but behind closed doors, when they get in the house, they're going a completely opposite direction of what they just sang about and heard about in church. That's going to create this sense in your child of despair, just going, that ain't real. It's not real at all. And so I'm always sensitive that I don't want to be a hindrance to my child's spiritual development.
Yeah.
So that's why I think apologies are so important. When I mess up, I want to own that. I want to call it out, and I want to ask for forgiveness.
Call us up, Bryan. I'm about to read this and then I'm gonna let you go here. I did want to read it since you brought back up apologies. I had highlighted this area And you said apologies are the voice of the humble. It takes a humble person to say sorry, to acknowledge and confess the wrong, and it is humility that becomes the lifeline to a healthy, vibrant relationship with our children. And I want to let you know that with the daughter, even at the age of 3, I have found myself authentically apologizing to her when I've done something wrong, because I think one of the marks that dads miss, and you said this earlier in a way, but that we exasperate our children too, or quote unquote, just like they can get on our nerves sometimes, even at 3, we can get on our children's nerves, quote unquote here. And we can misread their intentions and react out of that. And so I found myself apologizing to my daughter and teaching her the importance of apologizing and that type of communication. And I already see the reciprocity in that. So, man, this book has been a gem. It's been a gift. It's been spot on in so many ways. Some things, as I read this, I've made note that, man, Bryan is calling me up, and I appreciate you doing this because the tone of it is really relational, and it's really an easy read. It makes being a greater father tangible or palatable in a way. So I see a lot of practical things that I'm already doing and some that I know I need to start to implement. Before we get out of here, I do want you to tell us where we can get the book and anything else that's coming down the pipeline for you, man, with the dad difference.
So yeah, you can go to Amazon and get it. You can go to my website, bryanloritts.com, to get more information about it, to hear more about it. Pre-COVID, we had a huge book tour set up where my dad and I were going to go to various venues and just talk about fathering, but we've had to reshuffle the deck since COVID has happened. And so that tour will probably be put off till 2021. You can follow me on Twitter at BC Loritts, Loritts, or just at Loritts on Instagram to keep up with the journey of fatherhood.
Bryan, it's been such a pleasure. I sincerely appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been listening to Fatherhood is Dope with my special guest, Bryan Loritts, the author of The Dad Difference, the 4 most important gifts you can give to your kids. I have links available in the description on YouTube, as well as the description under the podcast. So wherever you get podcasts, you should have this description as well. Bryan, I sincerely appreciate you again. It's your guy, Aaron McGee with Fatherhood is Dope, the podcast. Peace.